Hello, listeners. This is Ken. Welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the reading of a fic entitled All For You. Here's the summary. Izuku wasn't supposed to be here yet. It was April. He was supposed to be born in July. Or, Izuku came far, far earlier than he was supposed to. It changes everything. This fic is 72,000 words with 94 chapters. So some of the chapters are pretty short, meaning that I'll be doing this in chapter clusters for the most part. In addition to that, instead of saying which chapter we're in, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, I'll be stating which day we're in because this fic is structured out by days. And with that being said, here's day 1. Day 1, 26 weeks. All for One, the greatest supervillain in Japan, perhaps the world, was completely and utterly useless. His fantasy was crumbling all around him. Reality settled on his shoulders, as heavy as his sins, and as relentless as the many monitors beeping beside him. The neonatal intensive care unit was cold and sterile. The warm interior design did little to provide any relief. There was no escape. He sat with his head in his hands, a chair pulled as close as it possibly could be to the incubator next to him. The incubator that held his tiny, tiny son, born after 26 weeks, not even 1 kilogram, almost 100 days too early. He could fit in his hand, if he was allowed to hold him. But he couldn't. Izuku was so underdeveloped that he wasn't able to differentiate between touch and pain yet. He was medically unstable. His lungs weren't ready to breathe, his eyes weren't ready to see, his skin wasn't ready to be out in the air. His digestive system wasn't ready to eat. His heart wasn't ready to work on its own. There were so many things Izuku couldn't do. He wasn't supposed to be here yet. It was April. He was supposed to be born in July. Izuku wasn't supposed to be out yet. He was supposed to be in Inko's belly. But Inko wasn't even here. No, Inko, his lovely wife, who had stolen his black heart, lay cold and still in the morgue. The emergency room in Musutafu General Hospital, where they went first, couldn't help her once it was clear things were going wrong. Then by the time she had been transferred to Taonima Memorial Hospital, it was too late. Preeclampsia, HELLP syndrome, hemorrhage, and then she was gone. He hadn't been able to prevent that either. It hurt. All his experience, all his knowledge, all his quirks, all for nothing. There was nothing he could have done to ensure his wife's survival. Now, there was nothing he could do to make sure his son survived his first day on this planet either. Izuku's heart monitor beeped next to him. He waited for each heartbeat with bated breath. It felt incredibly unfair that he had lived for nearly 2 centuries while anyone he dared to call family dropped around him like flies. All for One lifted his head to stare at Izuku under the blue glow of the light the staff had placed on him to help with his jaundice. His son was painfully tiny. His diaper was delicately folded over him to avoid excessive skin contact. He looked less like a newborn and more like a miniature elderly person, all thin limbs, wrinkly, delicate skin, and wispy, barely there green hair. There was an IV line going into his upper arm, a mask protecting his eyes, a blood pressure cuff around his other arm, and a pulse oximeter around his foot. He was on a ventilator because he could not breathe on his own, and there was a small tube going down his throat that delivered surfactant to his lungs, amongst far too many other wires and tubes he did not know the purpose of. He nearly disappeared underneath his hat, diaper, and the medical equipment. He looked nothing like the chubby, healthy baby he and Inko had hoped for. All for One put his head back in his hands. The NICU was unbearably silent. In all his life, All for One had never felt so lost and small. He didn't know what to do. Ring, 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 ring. Hello, this is Inko Midoriya. I'm sorry I missed your call. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Beep. A soft, shaky sigh. I miss you, Inko. Call ended. Day 2. Izuku was turning blue. All for One's baby was turning blue. Hizashi's baby was turning blue. He had fallen asleep next to the incubator, just for 3 hours, and woke up to a blue baby. Hizashi cursed himself. There were already nurses around the incubator, working with practiced ease and calm. Hizashi knew that he was in the way, but he couldn't move. He stood stock still, his hand resting on the incubator, staring at Izuku's thin, fragile body, eyes scanning everything but processing nothing. His tiny chest rose and fell in time with the ventilator, but everything else was all wrong. Alarms clamored around him. Doctors and nurses and Other staff he did not know crowded around his baby. His tiny, tiny baby, who was far too still, whose lips and extremities were a dull, ashen blue. He was reminded then of a memory he had tried so hard to forget back when Yoichi could not even crawl, and all for one was nothing but a curious child named Hisashi. He remembered leaning over the crib railing, watching Yoichi struggle to move and play, watching him tire after only playing for a little bit, watching his lips and extremities turn blue when he went too far. They found out shortly after that Yoichi had a heart murmur. It couldn't be treated because Yoichi looked like he had a meta ability. The pulse oximeter started alarming louder. Hisashi's head shot up. 75%. It shouldn't be below 90%. The door opened, several more people rushing in. "I believe something is wrong," Hisashi said dumbly, as he was gently pulled away to the other side of the room by a nurse. The palm of his hand felt cold as it was pulled away from the incubator. "Don't worry, hun. We'll figure out what's going on," the nurse said, patting his arm. One of the doctors placed a stethoscope on Izuku's chest. It was almost the same width as Izuku's body. A murmur went up from the crowd around the incubator. The staff's movements became quicker and purposeful, voices slow and businesslike. Something was wrong. "What's going on? What's wrong with him?" Hisashi asked. His own voice sounded unfamiliar. Some people left. They came back with diagnostic equipment. His stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Hisashi was tapped on the arm. The nurse smiled at him professionally and said, "We're working on it, hun. I need to get a medical history from you, so we can rule some conditions out. What's your name?" Her voice was starting to blend with the ringing in his ears. He thought of Yoichi in his arms when his mother allowed him to bottle feed the baby. He remembered Yoichi going ashen and limp, too tired to even finish the bottle. "Hisashi Midoriya." "The mother was Inko Midoriya, correct?" He wished she could be here. "Yes." "Do you have any medical conditions?" "No. But my brother Yoichi." Truncus arteriosus, a congenital heart deformity, where the aorta and pulmonary arteries merge into a single giant artery. It's usually accompanied by a large hole in the heart. There's a great amount of blood mixing, resulting in desaturated blood being pumped to the body. The blood that is pumped to the lungs is too much, at too high a pressure. Yoichi could survive his heart murmur without treatment. Izuku would die without treatment in less than 2 months. 67% of premature infants with truncus arteriosus die anyway. He shouldn't get too attached. His phone was ringing. Hisashi dragged his eyes away from where they had been glued to Izuku's heart monitor and pulse oximeter for hours. He knew he shouldn't get too attached, but he still didn't want his son to die. He let out a heavy sigh and forced himself to his feet, joints creaking. He turned on a couple of flexibility quirks in the vain hope that they would do something about that. He picked up his phone with a glare. He'd been ignoring any calls from his associates. Keeping his underground kingdom churning just didn't feel important right now. But at the very least, he had been checking to see who was trying to get in contact with him. It was Mitsuki Bakugo, Inko's best friend. His eyes stung something terrible. He answered the call. "Hey," Mitsuki said, her voice unusually gentle. "How are you doing?" "Terrible, honestly," Hisashi said, his voice rough. He cleared his throat as he began to pace Izuku's hospital room. It was dark, lights glittering outside the hospital complex. He was lucky that Tanima Memorial had accommodations for patients, not that he would have left even if they hadn't. "I bet, Hee-chan," she said. She let out a long sigh. "I know Inko-chan would be right by you if she could." There was a lump in his throat. He hadn't been this close to crying in over 100 years. Besides yesterday. Let's not talk about Inko," Hisashi said. "All right, Hee-chan," she said softly. There was some soft shuffling on the other end of the line. Hisashi wandered back over to Izuku's incubator. He could never stay away for long. "How's the kiddo?" she asked after a while. "Poor," Hisashi pushed out. "Must be real bad then," she said. "Yes." Hisashi sucked down a deep breath. "He has a heart condition. It's likely from my side. Izuku, he's so small, and yet he's already on so many medications. The doctors, they're hoping to keep him going long enough until he is big enough for a corrective surgery." "Izuku is a lovely name, Hee-chan," Mitsuki said. "It was Inko's choice." "Of course it was," Mitsuki said, fond and sad. There was a pause. Izuku twitched his movements hard to see in the dark room. Mitsuki sucked in a deep breath the way she did when she was about to declare something. Izuku better make it, you hear me? We haven't gotten his baby blanket yet, because he was supposed to arrive after Katsuki, but we're going to get it, and I better be giving it to him, not you. Hizashi chuckled, the sound bubbling up despite the weight that was crushing him. Yes, ma'am. Good. We'll visit soon, all right? Mitsuki said. Sounds good, Hizashi said, and the phone call ended. Hizashi stared out the window. It was late. His eyelids were heavy, body lethargic. He had slept enough. He turned on as many stamina quirks as he had and settled into the chair next to Izuku's incubator. Tamina Memorial Hospital sent a request to Musutafa General for Hizashi Midoriya's family medical history after failing to find much. Musutafa General's system could find no family medical history for Hizashi Midoriya. No mother recorded. No father recorded. No siblings. Nothing. It was like Hizashi Midoriya appeared out of the ether. The Musutafa General system automatically flagged his file as a potential forged identity. A summarized report was generated attached to a small clip of security footage with a good view of his face and automatically uploaded to the Hero Information Network. Day 3. Hizashi hadn't slept in 3 days. To say he was exhausted would be an understatement. Objectively, Hizashi knew he should call up Garaki. Technically, the man was a pediatrician, and Hizashi knew him well. He should be able to sleep if he knew Garaki was watching over his son. But Hizashi also knew Garaki's true passion. The Nomu were still in the animal testing stage, but there was a large, visceral part of him that recoiled violently at the thought of Garaki coming anywhere near Izuku. That, and he knew Garaki had no training with neonates, especially not neonates that had their heart rates and oxygen saturation drop very, very frequently, anytime some of the staff touched him, even for the most necessary procedures like changing his diaper. He would fall into bradycardia, and his oxygen saturation would drop. So he didn't call. Learning that bradycardia and oxygen desaturation were common issues in premature infants was as reassuring as it was nerve-wracking, especially since his son already had enough issues with his heart, even if the frequency of Izuku's braddies and desats made him a bit of a touch-me-not baby. That didn't stop him from wanting to touch him or hold him, at least once, but something held him back. He was afraid, perhaps. If even the staff avoided touching him, what possible benefit could his touch confer? He wasn't Inko. You can talk to him, you know, a nurse said, breaking him out of his thoughts. Hizashi looked up from where he had been blankly watching her administer Izuku's next dose of medications into his IV line. He blinked tiredly. Pardon? He asked, careful to keep his voice quiet. He's heard your voice before, the nurse said, gesturing to Izuku and smiling slightly. So it would be comforting for him to hear. Oh, Hizashi said, looking back to Izuku. Izuku's limbs moved jerkily amongst the blankets and wires. He was lying on his back, facing the ceiling, buried under tubes and wires and position aids. Speaking to him felt silly. It wasn't like Izuku was developed enough to respond. She was likely just saying something parents in this situation wanted to hear. He knew Izuku's chances of survival were low. He knew he shouldn't get too attached. He should be preparing, expecting, to lose him as well. He should be preparing to get back to work. His little domestic escapade with Inko had ended horribly, and soon enough he would be able to drown his grief in villainy, just like he had with Yoichi. Still, he watched the nurse leave and sighed. He stared at Izuku. His jaundice had resolved, and the mask covering his eyes had been removed, although he had yet to see Izuku open them. The room was kept dim to prevent Izuku from being overstimulated. The monitors beeped, the ventilator hissed, the staff murmured outside. Hizashi placed a hand against the incubator and indulged himself. Hello, Izuku, he whispered. It's a pleasure to meet you. Izuku twitched. His head turned toward Hizashi. One blue eye peeked open, unfocused and dilated, but undoubtedly looking at him. Hizashi's breath caught in his throat. He blinked, reminded himself how to breathe, rubbed his tired eyes until colors burst behind his eyelids, but when he looked again, Izuku's head was still turned, his eyes still open and looking at him. Hello, he breathed. Izuku's other eye peeked open as well. Hizashi's heart swelled in his chest. He bowed his head over the incubator. Nobody had to know if Hizashi cried. The door to Izuku's room was closed. The Hero Information Network pinged. Some AI at Musutafu General flagged a potential forged identity. Sir Night-Eye clicked the notification, and the file opened up. Shit. Izuku had begun to show signs of heart failure. More medications were started. His condition continued to worsen. He was 3 days old. Absent-mindedly, Hisashi wondered if this was karma. All Might's phone was ringing. He grunted, looking down at his belt in confusion. All heroes were required to have a quick way to get in contact with their agency, usually a secure line, like the one his own phone utilized, but Sir Night-Eye hardly ever called him, unless an emergency was happening. A stone settled in his gut. "Sorry, folks, but I've got to go," All Might said, pushing the purse snatcher he'd just caught over to the police and jumping away. He landed on a rooftop and quickly answered his phone. He'd missed Night-Eye's first call, but he had immediately called again. "Night-Eye, what's wrong?" All Might asked. "Come to the office," Night-Eye said, his voice as tense and sharp as wire. "What for—" "Now, All Might," Night-Eye said. "This must be bad." "Right," All Might said. "I'll be right over." Night-Eye was pacing in All Might's office when he returned, his hands clasped behind his back and his head bowed forward. "Night-Eye," All Might started, but Night-Eye said nothing, just motioned him forward to his computer. All Might walked over slowly, bending down to take a look. It was an automated notification for a possible forged identity, a Hisashi Midoriya, from the Musutafu General Hospital. The notification contained a small summary that stated no family history was found, and a short video of the man pacing outside a room in the emergency department. All Might played the video, then he played it again, and again, and again. "No," All Might croaked. "Yes," Night-Eye said heavily. "It's him. All for one." All Might growled, rage lighting a fire in his chest as he glared at the pixelated face on Night-Eye's computer. "Where is he?" "All Might," Night-Eye started warily. "Where is he, Night-Eye?" All Might roared. "Nowhere you can go," came a voice All Might hadn't heard in decades. All Might whipped around to stare at him, mouth hanging open. He shook himself out of it and asked, "Gran, why? He's right there. I need to go." "You planning on fighting the bastard in a hospital, Toshinori?" Gran asked scathingly. All Might shut up. "Thought so," Gran snorted. He knocked his cane into All Might's leg as he walked in, taking a seat in one of the office chairs. Night-Eye nodded at Gran and took his computer back, sitting at his desk once again. "Besides the obvious carelessness of fighting in a hospital, I don't believe he's even at Musutafu General anymore." "Where is he, then?" Gran grunted. "Did he escape?" All Might asked, aghast. If that monster had slipped away again after showing his face in broad daylight. Night-Eye swore. "Night-Eye!" All Might exclaimed. "What's wrong now?" Gran demanded. "He's at Tanima Memorial," Night-Eye groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. All Might frowned. "Tanima is closer to us. That's a good thing." "Yes, they are closer," Night-Eye rubbed his temples. "But they are also extremely frustrating to work with." "Explain," Gran snapped. All Might slowly sat down in another chair to listen. Night-Eye hunched over the computer, working as he talked. "Tanima's privacy protocols are draconian, and they are extremely protective of their patients. Patient identities are classified, as are the identities of pretty much anyone who comes through their doors. This prevents any notification from going out to hero or police networks about villains who seek care there for themselves or their families, so long as they stay peaceful within the hospital grounds." "How has this place not been shut down yet?" Gran asked. "Public goodwill, mostly, and precedent. Tanima made some agreement with the HPSC decades ago. We've been shackled by it ever since. They claim it is to make a safe environment to provide the greatest reach of care, and their PR department has been very successful in convincing the general populace of the policy's efficacy. They aren't entirely wrong. Villains attack the hospital and the surrounding area much less frequently, since they know that Tanima and its rehabilitation program are basically their only chance at not being arrested after release." Gran swore. "He must have gone there on purpose," All Might muttered. "Yes," Night-Eye said. "It will be a pain to get any kind of information out of them, much less an arrest." Night-Eye made a final click on his computer, blinked, leaned in closer, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "What is it, Night-Eye?" All Might asked warily. "He was transferred to Tanima's NICU." NICU? Gran asked. Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, Night Eye answered. Tanima has the only level 4 NICU in the region. All Might blinked, then rubbed his temples, thinking he had done stints visiting children's hospitals before to cheer up sick little kids who needed a little joy. He'd probably been to Tanima before to do that, but NICU... The NICU is where very ill infants go, isn't it? I was never allowed to go there when I visited hospitals before. All Might asked, looking up. Night Eye nodded. What is All for One doing in a NICU? All Might asked incredulously. Could be a hostage situation, Gran said ominously. I'll do my best to find out and get you over there as soon as possible, All Might, Night Eye said, pushing up his glasses. But please wait for me to get you that permission. Tanima won't allow you to barge in, and will likely ban you from the grounds. They've done it before. All Might glared out the window. Fine. Ring, 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 ring. Hello, this is Inko Midoriya. I'm sorry I missed your call. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Beep. Why do I keep calling? I know that you're gone. A heavy sigh. But, Izuku is not doing well. There was a heart condition that the OBGYN missed in the ultrasound, I suppose. His chances are not very good. All right, listeners. This concludes the first 3 days of the fic, All for You. I hope you all are enjoying it so far. It does bounce around a little bit to kind of set up the scene here in the first few chapters. These were chapters 1 through 11. Personally, I really love the concept, and I like that All for One is the POV that we get for the majority of the fic. Let me know your thoughts and reactions, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.